Welcome to the first episode of Two Lawyers, Three Opinions. I'm Monique Beadle.
And I'm Morad.
We're both lawyers with the Jerusalem Institute of Justice.
I'm an Israeli based in Jerusalem.
And I'm an American based in New York.
We go inside the United Nations to challenge double standards, delegitimization, and demonization of Israel within the international community.
You could say that we have a front row seat to the madness.
We are here to pull back the curtain a little bit in order to help you navigate the unprecedented legal warfare applied against Israel since October 7th.
This is a war that's fought on many fronts. The International Court of Justice, the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, in the media. There's a new front opening just in the last few weeks, and it's in courtrooms around the world. Let's start with this New York Times headline from January 8th to kick off our conversation. The headline is, Israeli soldiers on vacation are being arrested for war crimes in Gaza. Here's the story as the Times tells it. An Israeli reservist left Brazil in a hurry this week after a Brazilian judge ordered an investigation into whether he committed war crimes in Gaza. Israeli consular officials helped the soldier, Yuval Vagdani, fly out of the country on Sunday after the order became public. It was prompted by a criminal complaint filed by a Belgium-based nonprofit group, the Hind Rajab Foundation, which focuses on offensive legal action against perpetrators, accomplices, and inciters of war crimes and crimes against humanity in Palestine. On Wednesday, the Israeli military announced that it would no longer identify soldiers by name in the media, fearing the arrest of soldiers abroad. Ori, you've been following this issue really heavily from our headquarters in Jerusalem, so I want to treat you like the guest expert today and have you sit in the interview chair.
Right, let's go for it.
So let's start with the basics. On what basis can a country that doesn't even share a border with the state of Israel seek the arrest of an Israeli soldier?
The principle at play here, known as the principle of universal jurisdiction. It's actually founded on the notion that heinous crimes pose a threat to the international order and therefore should not go unpunished. This principle enables countries to claim jurisdiction of certain crimes due to their gravity and the universal condemnation. We're talking about crimes such as genocide, such as war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the crime of torture. They are so heinous that they are viewed as offenses against the entire international community. And consequently, this allows states to prosecute these crimes no matter where they were committed or the nationality of those involved. It doesn't matter if it's the perpetrator or the victims. They can claim jurisdiction over a case because the alleged crimes pose a threat to the international community as a whole.
Okay, so a well-intentioned initiative, but it has some problems, which I think we should get into. So let's first talk about whether this concept of universal jurisdiction is being used to address war crimes or crimes against humanity in countries besides Israel. Is this an example of no Jews, no news?
An interesting question, to be honest. Let's remember that out of the 193 UN member states today, 163, at least theoretically, adhere to the principle of universal jurisdiction. Not all of them, of course, are actively engaged with it. If we want to mark the leading countries that are doing the most extensive use of universal jurisdiction, we look at countries such as France and Argentina, the UK, Germany, Sweden, and Spain. I wouldn't say specifically target Jews, since we've seen attempts at issuing arrest warrants against different leaders from across the world in the past. It's important to mention that there are some countries such as the UK that we mentioned before, such as Spain, Norway, and Turkey, that there were specific attempts to use universal jurisdiction against Jewish leaders in the past. Belgium, for example, tried to go after former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon and retired General Amos Yaron for war crimes or crimes against humanity. Today, Belgium hosts the founders and leaders of the Hind Rajab Foundation that you've mentioned before. These are basically the people and the organization that stands at the forefront of the contemporary attempts to target IDF soldiers traveling overseas, definitely more so post-October 7th. And back in 2003, the same Belgium even initiated a lawsuit against General Tommy Franks, US Army Chief of Staff in the operations in Iraq, regarding civilian casualties in the war in Iraq. And- But in this case, what mentioning is that eventually the Belgian actually transferred the case to an American court.
Let's talk a little bit more about Belgium. Who is running and financing this Hind Rajab Foundation in Belgium, and what do we need to know about this organization?
They're situated in Belgium. The gentleman that stands behind that is Abu Jaja. He's the founder. He's Lebanese, but he's got Belgian citizenship. He's a, his family is actually from a little village called Khanin near Bit Bel in the southern Lebanon. The Ab himself looks very Western and he speaks fluent English, but don't let it fool you. He's a well known terror supporter and denies the Holocaust ever happened. He owns several Lebanese companies, some hit with American sanctions for funneling money to Hezbollah. Diab himself used to be very high in the ranks of Hezbollah. His foundation, the Hinad Job Foundation, started in Brussels a few months ago in September 2024. It's registered as a nonprofit in Belgium, but really it's a part of a movement that we all know for many years called March 30 movement that has been on a mission to legally go after IDF soldiers for many, many years. The app's history is actually very interesting. His history is packed with support of terror against Israel and a bunch of Holocaust denial statements that we can find online as well. And he even called the 9/11 attacks sweet revenge. That's how he titled that. And his partner, Karim Hassan, who stands behind the Another Job Foundation alongside Diab, is actually just as shady as the first dude. He's been busted by a Dutch court before for spreading Holocaust denying stuff. And get this, last December, Monique, Hassan said that he condemns Hamas for taking only 100 hostages. That, he, of course, made a mistake. It was more than 100, but that's what he said. He condemns Hamas for taking only 100 hostages instead of 500 or 1,000.
Oh, he
Basically,
sounds lovely.
both sounds very lovely. You can imagine sitting with him for coffee. Very interesting conversation.
It's interesting because these are people who would probably be arrested if they ever set foot in the United States for providing
Most
material support for terrorism. Where are they getting their money?
So that is the $1 million question in this regard. There's no public info available whatsoever. No one really knows, no one can really track the money trail that flows from and to the foundation. There are a lot of different assumptions in this case. A lot of them talks about the fact that he's using his own money, funneling money from one of his companies and so on. But again, there's no public info regarding the sources of money that serves the Another Job Foundation.
Yeah. One of the problems here is that in Belgium, NGOs don't have to disclose their donors, and they seem to be okay with Hezbollah. So let's talk about how this actually works. How do they know who to target? How do they pursue this campaign?
So to be honest, there's no high-end technology or fancy algorithm at play here. Believe it or not, it's actually IDF soldiers themselves accidentally helping our adversaries in this case. Just what they posting online, just by the digital footprint, I would say, they leave behind on social media. Lots of IDF soldiers snapping photos or videos during or after missions in the Gaza Strip and then throwing them up on social media and without the proper context, without anyone to explain what stands behind that, this post and filled with half truths or misconceptions can actually look like violations of international law, alleged violations of international law, I would say. It's like striking gold for the Israeli groups like the Hinad Rijal Foundations and other initiatives. They connect this social media post alleging them as evidence of war crimes or crimes against humanity committed by Israeli soldiers, and then begin to constructing a legal case. Additionally, they gather personal information about those individuals and disputed them among hostile groups who harassed them constantly. And they also cross-reference soldiers' holiday photos that, again, that they themselves post online with operational footages from places like the Gaza Strip or up north in Lebanon, and using this information publicly and demand a public arrest and prosecution of these soldiers in the countries they are now visiting. A race against the clock kicks off to get the soldiers as soon as possible out of that particular country before they end up behind bars in that foreign country. And to be honest, Monique, it's a real mess. And all because of few online posts that no one really imagined that where it's going to lead.
Which countries pose the greatest risk? Where should Israeli soldiers think twice before they travel abroad?
The countries that pose the greatest risk for Israeli soldiers traveling abroad, particularly I would say since October 7, includes Ireland, which is not really surprising, Brazil, that is the representative of South America that uses universal jurisdiction and having a very complex, I would say, stance with Israel since October 7. Spain, that we talked about, Belgium, South Africa, where there's a case accusing Israel of committing genocide at the ICJ. These nations, along with Morocco and Norway and Cyprus, which a lot of Israelis are visiting very often, Sri Lanka and the Netherlands, France and Thailand, and we have something like 20 plus countries that already initiated some kind of legal actions against IDF soldiers, making them high risk destinations for travelers. I wouldn't even rule out countries like the UK, which has actively embraced the principle of universal jurisdiction. There's a talk that under Keir Starmer's leadership, the UK stance towards Israel may be shifting and not really stable. I would keep an eye on Germany as well. Despite all of the dedicated history that we have with Germany, they're still a significant advocate for universal jurisdiction.
Okay, let's talk about Germany and its delicate history with us. My grandfather left Germany as a teenager on the Kindertransport, and he returned 4 years later as an American soldier. His battalion helped to liberate Dachau, which is a concentration camp outside of Munich, which the Nazis shipped all of their evidence to as the Allies were approaching. My grandfather stayed after the war ended to track down and arrest Nazi war criminals and prepare for the Nuremberg tribunals. The idea that 80 years later, Germany would become a theater for criminal prosecutions of Jewish soldiers defending and protecting their own people from terrorists, to me is just especially rich. It illustrates the gravity of this situation. I want to ask you your personal take as well, because you're not just a lawyer with the Jerusalem Institute of Justice, you're also an experienced IDF combat veteran. You unfortunately know Gaza very well. So, what are your personal feelings on this new international legal trend?
I won't lie, I'm genuinely worried. I think it's only a matter of time before we see the first international arrest broadcasted all over the news. But with that, I would say that I'm not against holding people accountable. Don't get me wrong, especially those who commit terrible crimes, heinous crimes against, as we said, the international community as a whole, and then slip through the cracks, I would say, of the weak judicial systems in their own countries, dodging justice. I would say that this powerful tool called universal jurisdiction can only serve justice when it's applied correctly. And my concern lies in the potential of misusing this universal jurisdiction principle, especially regarding countries like Israel that have a strong, robust, and respected judicial system. What it's actually is doing, it messes with our sovereignty. It disrupts our domestic legal affairs. So for me, the problem isn't with universal jurisdiction itself, but rather how it's applied. Let's not forget Israel used universal jurisdiction, like in the case of the major Holocaust perpetrator Adolf Eichmann, when Israeli agents brought him back from Argentina for a trial in Israel.
It's a good point. I think there's some critical differences here. Adolf Eichmann was not a low-level soldier. He was one of the architects of the Holocaust and the extermination programs. Eichmann also was not arrested on the basis of just a photograph or a short video clip. He was arrested on the basis of orders issued in his hand, and there was his own signature was on many of the incriminating documents, and it was clear that he was not going to meet with justice in Argentina. Argentina now is a great friend to Israel. This is actually a recent phenomenon. If you're sitting in your office in Jerusalem and you've got a soldier or a reservist sitting on the other side of the table, and they're talking to you about their plans to travel abroad, what's the practical advice that you're giving them?
As a former IDF combat soldier, my advice would be go and don't cancel. Traveling is a must. I cannot stress this enough, Monique. It's really, really important. I would say like so level important after the horrors that they experienced in the Gaza Strip or anywhere else. I think that they need it. So first and foremost, go travel. That would be my first tip for them. Alongside that, I would say that you have to stay sharp about safety. Don't compromise on that. And more practically, start with picking places that are cool with Israel or wasn't that hostile against Israel. Ideally, I would say those countries who are not members of the ICC or they're not really implementing universal jurisdiction, first and foremost. So picking the right destination, that's what you need to start with. Then make sure that your social media is completely clean. No uniform pics, no mentioning of your military role, and definitely no posting of any kind of action that you did on the ground. While you're there, keep the personal info on the down low. Don't broadcast yourself, don't broadcast your location live. And if it's really itching and you want to share with your friends, wait until you come back at home to Israel safely, and then and only then post those pictures. Don't forget, lock down your social profiles as well. Make them private. Don't let anyone else tag you. And before you head out, try to contact the military prosecution system and get a risk assessment. Ask for a risk assessment for wherever you're heading. And don't forget to take the Israeli consulate number with you in case things go sideways. And don't forget, if you were arrested, the most important tip I would say, just zip it. Don't say a word. Zero cooperation. Alongside that, I would say that usually what happens is that these cases are being resolved in diplomatic channels, and hopefully what's going to happen in the near future. And remember, the states got your back in these scenarios. So put your trust in the state of Israel. They know what they're doing.
So I think it's generally good advice to shut up and call your lawyer. And you've given us a nice spin on it, which is shut up and call the consulate. I hope people take this advice to heart and put it into practice. Thanks, Zori, for giving us some of your expertise on this issue. I think there's going to be a lot more about this coming up in the news, so it's going to continue to be relevant. For our first episode, this was a good start. I certainly learned a lot from you, and I hope everyone listening did too. If you want to hear more like this, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and if you're following on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. That's going to drive the podcast up in the rankings. We'll have future episodes about what's going on in the International Court of Justice and the ICC. We'll talk about the special rapporteurs in the United Nations and how they bully each other behind the scenes. We'll talk about atrocity denial and free speech and incitement to terrorism, student visas and universities and the laws of war. There's a whole range of legal topics that we're excited to unpack for you. So until next time, we're 2 lawyers, 3 opinions, signing off.